November in New England already carried the sound of winter's approaching footsteps. On the 2-hour drive from Portland, Maine to her childhood home, Eleanor Harrison glanced at her husband Michael gripping the steering wheel in the passenger seat and let out a deep sigh. In the back seat, their 8-year-old son Jacob and 5-year-old daughter Emily sat quietly, absorbed in their tablets. "I just hope this year's Thanksgiving will be peaceful," Eleanor murmured under her breath. Michael smiled gently and replied, "Don't worry. Your mother's getting older, maybe she's mellowed out a bit." Eleanor managed a bitter smile. Every time she returned to her family home, the vulnerability she'd felt as a teenager came flooding back. At work, where she served as an accountant at the bank, she was trusted and beloved by her subordinates. But the moment she stepped foot in this house, she reverted to the daughter who had always been treated as second best. As they approached the front entrance, the aroma of cooking was already wafting through the air. Before they could ring the doorbell, bright laughter could be heard from inside, her mother Linda's voice mixed with her sister Sophia's. Linda opened the door wearing an apron. Her salt and pepper hair was carefully styled, and despite it being Thanksgiving morning, her makeup was applied to perfection. "You're late." "I was starting to worry." "Sorry, Mom." "There was traffic," Eleanor replied, holding her children's hands. "Grandma." Jacob and Emily ran toward her, and Linda's expression softened for just a moment. But she quickly returned to her usual slightly weary look. Sophia emerged from the kitchen, her long chestnut hair pulled back, wearing the same style apron as her mother. "Hey, sis, you must be tired. Mom and I have been preparing the turkey since this morning. It was quite a job. I could have helped." "You should have called," Eleanor said while setting down their luggage. "You're busy with work," Linda interjected. "Sophia lives locally, so she can always help out. She's such a blessing." Sophia smiled smugly. "Unlike you, I have time. Working for a local company doing bookkeeping isn't as demanding as your job." Eleanor said nothing and caught Michael's eye. Her husband shrugged slightly and guided the children to the living room. By afternoon, relatives began arriving one by one. Aunt Carol, her mother's sister, and Uncle Robert, her father's brother, along with his family. The house filled with the joyful sounds of family reunions. "Eleanor, you don't look well. Have you been tired lately?" Aunt Carol asked with concern. "I'm fine. It's just been busy this month with the fiscal year end," Eleanor replied with a forced smile. Just then, Sophia approached with a wine glass in hand. "Do you remember in high school when you failed that math test and Mom got so angry?" The relatives began to chuckle. Eleanor's cheeks flushed red. "Sophia, that was. But it's okay, now. You've become a respectable accountant," Sophia continued with an innocent expression. "Though I hear you've been making a lot of mistakes at work lately. Must be stress." Eleanor's heart began to race. There was no way Sophia could know about workplace mistakes, she hadn't even mentioned such things to her mother. "That's not true," Michael interjected. "Eleanor won the department's Employee of the Month award this month." Linda turned a cold gaze toward Michael. "You don't know about workplace matters. You only know what Eleanor tells you." Heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor clenched her fists while forcing her usual smile. Here we go again, she thought, the same pattern repeating itself this year. Evening came, and finally, it was time for dinner. The table was beautifully set with an array of dishes. Linda looked around at her family with satisfaction. "I'm so happy we can all celebrate Thanksgiving together as a family again this year." As dinner preparations began in earnest, Linda started directing the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Eleanor stood up and positioned herself next to her mother. "Is there anything I can help with?" "No, just sit and relax," Linda replied without turning around. Sophia's here, so we're fine. Sophia smiled triumphantly while stirring the gravy. You just take it easy. Like a guest. A small pain shot through Eleanor's chest. Like a guest. In her own family home, she was being treated like an outsider. But I could help with something. We really don't need help, Linda said with a slightly irritated tone. You're busy all the time, so at least today, just rest. At that moment, Linda whispered something in Sophia's ear. The two spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in Eleanor's direction. Eleanor became anxious and tried to get closer, but Sophia blocked her path. Sis, we really have it under control. Just leave it to us. Eleanor reluctantly returned to the dining room. Michael was playing card games with the children, and the relatives were watching a football game on TV. She stood alone, gazing out the window, lost in thought. Aunt Carol sat down next to Eleanor. Are you really okay? You've seemed down since earlier. Yes, I'm fine, Eleanor smiled. Linda and Sophia seem a bit cold toward you, Aunt Carol said quietly. It's always been that way, but hasn't it gotten particularly bad recently? Eleanor was at a loss for words. Indeed, she had been feeling that her mother's and sister's attitudes were growing colder year by year. Especially since last year, she was increasingly treated as if she were a burden to the family. Just then, Sophia's voice could be heard from the kitchen. I asked around about Sis at her workplace. Turns out she really has been making a lot of mistakes lately. Eleanor turned around in shock. Sophia had been in contact with people from her workplace? How could that be possible? Really? Linda's voice echoed. I've been worried about that for a while. She's always been weak under pressure, Sophia continued. Always has been, right? Eleanor stood up. She couldn't just sit there and listen to this anymore. Sophia, who at my workplace did you talk to? Sophia looked uncomfortable. Oh, you were listening? Answer me. Who did you talk to? Well, that's... Sophia looked toward her mother. Michael also stood up. Eleanor, what's wrong? Sophia says she's been talking to people from my workplace, Eleanor's voice was trembling. But Sophia doesn't know any of my colleagues. Linda interrupted. Eleanor, you're being too loud. We have guests. Mom, this is important, Eleanor stared at her mother. Who exactly did Sophia talk to? Sis, there's no reason to get so upset, Sophia looked troubled. We're just worried about you. Michael placed his hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor, calm down. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Linda said coldly. Michael, you don't know this, but Eleanor has always had a habit of lying. Those words froze the air in the dining room. The relatives turned around, and even the children stopped what they were doing. Mom, Eleanor's voice trembled. When have I ever lied? In high school, in college, Linda continued. Whenever things got difficult, you'd always make up stories. That's... This time is the same, Sophia interrupted. You're having problems at work but hiding it from your family. Michael stepped protectively in front of his wife. That's not true. Eleanor is highly valued at her workplace. She's even being considered for a promotion next month. Linda laughed coldly. Michael, you're such a kind person. But you shouldn't believe everything Eleanor tells you. Eleanor fought back tears as she said, Why do you think of me this way? I'm saying this because I care about you, Linda's voice was stern. Accept reality. You're not like Sophia. Aunt Carol stood up. Linda, that's cruel. Eleanor has built a wonderful family. Carol, you don't know, Linda cut off her sister. You don't know how much trouble this child was. Heavy silence filled the room. Eleanor clenched her fists, desperately holding back tears. Michael squeezed his wife's hand, and the children looked up at their parents with worried expressions. Suddenly, Linda stood up. That's enough. This is supposed to be Thanksgiving. She headed to the kitchen and retrieved a special wine bottle from the cabinet. This is wine I've been saving for a special occasion, Linda said with a smile. However, there was something unnatural about that smile. Let's all drink this today. Sophia clapped her hands. How wonderful. That's expensive wine, isn't it? Yes, it's very special, Linda replied, cradling the wine bottle carefully. I prepared this especially for today. Eleanor sensed something strange in her mother's expression. Behind that smile, she felt there was a coldness she'd never seen before. Returning to the dining table, Linda began carefully arranging wine glasses. Her movements were deliberate, as if she were performing some important ritual. Come now, everyone take your seats, Linda said brightly. The special dinner is about to begin. The dining table was decorated with a lavish Thanksgiving feast. Golden brown turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. However, the atmosphere around the family table remained heavy from the earlier argument. Linda held the special wine bottle with the solemn expression of a priest conducting communion. The label read, Chateau Margaux 1982, definitely an expensive wine. Everyone, let's give thanks that our family can gather together for Thanksgiving again this year, Linda stood up, glass in hand. This wine has very special meaning. The relatives leaned forward with interest. Aunt Carol exclaimed in surprise, my goodness, Chateau Margaux. Linda, why such expensive wine? I've been carefully storing this for a long time for this day, Linda's voice had an odd resonance. For someone special. Eleanor was carefully observing her mother's expression. Something was different. There was clearly something different from the usual Linda. The cold light flickering in her eyes. The forced smile lifting the corners of her mouth. Mom, you don't need to open such expensive wine, Eleanor said hesitantly. It's fine, Linda stared at Eleanor. That gaze was cold as ice. It's for you, Eleanor. Today is a special day. Sophia clapped her hands. Wonderful. I've never had Chateau Margaux. Sophia is still young, so she probably wouldn't appreciate such quality wine, Linda smiled gently. But when that smile was directed at Eleanor, it changed to icy coldness. Linda uncorked the bottle and checked the wine's aroma. Perfect. I've been waiting 30 years for this day. Michael frowned. 30 years? That long? Yes, Linda's voice took on a dreamy tone. It's wine from the year Eleanor was born. Eleanor's heart began to race. Why had her mother been specially storing wine from her birth year? And why open it now, at this moment? Linda began slowly pouring wine into Eleanor's glass. The deep red liquid sparkled beautifully in the glass. However, Eleanor sensed something foreign about it. It seemed slightly cloudy, with a texture different from normal wine. I prepared this especially for today, Eleanor, Linda said while looking into her daughter's eyes. Special wine just for you. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine at her mother's words. The phrase, just for you, carried an ominous premonition. Thank you, Mom, Eleanor replied in a trembling voice. Just as she reached for the glass. Wait. Sophia suddenly stood up. Her face bore a triumphant expression. Such expensive wine is wasted on sis, don't you think? Eleanor's hand stopped. Sophia, what are you saying? I mean, sis doesn't understand wine anyway, Sophia continued with a laugh. You usually only drink cheap wine. Someone like me should drink such luxury. Linda's face turned pale for a moment. Sophia, that's. But Sophia was already reaching toward Eleanor. I'll drink it for you. No. Linda shouted, but it was too late. Sophia snatched Eleanor's glass and smiled triumphantly. Mom really chose good wine. Sophia, wait. Linda's voice was desperate. That's. But Sophia had already brought the wine glass to her lips. Cheers. She took a big gulp. Delicious. This really is wonderful wine, Mom. Linda's face turned deathly pale. Her hands began to shake, and she gripped the edge of the table to support herself. What's wrong, Mom? Sophia asked innocently. You look terrible. No, wait, that's. Linda's voice was trembling. Sophia was about to take a second sip. At that moment, her expression suddenly changed. Huh? There's a strange taste. Looking at her glass, Sophia's face gradually filled with confusion. Mom, this wine tastes kind of bitter. Linda covered her face with both hands. Oh, God. Mom, what's wrong? Eleanor stood up. Just then, Sophia's body began to sway. I feel sick. The glass slipped from her hands and fell to the floor, shattering. Red wine spread across the white carpet. Sophia. Michael rushed over. Sophia slumped against her chair, her face turning ashen. What is this? The next moment, white foam began to overflow from Sophia's mouth. Her body convulsed and she collapsed onto the table. Call an ambulance. Aunt Carol screamed. Someone call an ambulance. The relatives frantically stood up, and the children began crying in fear. Michael was already on his phone, calling 911. Linda sank into her chair, trembling hands as she muttered, No, it's wrong, it was supposed to be Eleanor. Eleanor heard her mother's words and felt the blood drain from her face. What did you just say? It wasn't me, Linda shook her head. Eleanor, didn't I tell you? Today is a special day. Sophia had collapsed to the floor, unconscious. The foam wouldn't stop, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Eleanor stared at her mother in terror. What did you put in that wine? Linda looked up at her daughter, and there was a light bordering on madness in her eyes. It was for you, Eleanor. It was all for you. The ambulance siren could be heard approaching from the distance. Eleanor stood stunned, alternately looking at the collapsed Sophia and her distraught mother. The distrust she'd always felt toward her family had suddenly become a terrifying reality before her eyes. Her mother had tried to kill her. And now, that poison was ravaging her sister's body. Eleanor whispered in a trembling voice, why me? But Linda no longer answered. She just continued staring at the collapsed Sophia with vacant eyes. As the ambulance siren approached, police cars also arrived. The paramedics loaded Sophia onto a stretcher and rushed her to the hospital. Eleanor headed to the hospital with her husband and children. Linda was accompanied by police officers to the same hospital in a separate car. At St. Mary's Hospital Emergency Department, doctors were doing everything they could to treat Sophia. Eleanor sat trembling in the waiting room. Michael had returned home once to take the children to his parents. Mrs. Harrison, a nurse approached. Your mother would like to speak with you. Eleanor went to the room where her mother was waiting. Linda sat on a bed under police supervision. Her face had turned gray, and she looked 10 years older. Eleanor, Linda looked up at her daughter. Is Sophia okay? We don't know yet, Eleanor replied coldly. Mom, what did you put in that wine? Linda was silent for a long time. Eventually, with a resigned expression, she spoke. Sleeping pills. Sleeping pills? I was going to put you to sleep, Linda's voice trembled. I didn't intend to kill you. Just what? Eleanor's voice shook with anger. At that moment, the police officer intervened. Mrs. Harrison, you have the right to remain silent. Would you like to call a lawyer? No, Linda shook her head. I don't want to hide anything anymore. The officer activated recording equipment. Then please tell us in detail about tonight's events. Linda took a deep sigh. It was all for Sophia. For Sophia? Eleanor was confused. 3 months ago, Sophia came to me, Linda began. Crying, asking for help. The officer took notes while listening. Sophia had racked up huge debts from online casinos. $5 million. Eleanor gasped. $5 million? The payment deadline is next month. If she couldn't pay, dangerous people would make their move, Linda's voice was desperate. I had to protect my daughter. So the sleeping pills? Why me? Linda lowered her eyes. Sophia suggested it. Falsifying accounting records at your workplace to borrow company funds. Eleanor stood up. Embezzlement? But you would never cooperate, would you? Linda continued. So we plan to drug you and put your fingerprints on documents. I can't believe this, Eleanor held her head. You were going to frame me for a crime. We plan to return the money later, Linda's voice was pleading. I thought you'd be okay. You're so capable, you could find another job. The officer asked, did Sophia know about tonight's plan? Yes, Linda nodded. But she didn't know what methods I was planning to use. At that moment, Michael entered the room. Eleanor, are you okay? Michael, Eleanor stared at her husband. Why did the police come so quickly? Not just the ambulance. Michael wore a complex expression. Actually, I had reported this in advance. What? Your mother's and Sophia's behavior has been strange lately, Michael explained. Especially last week, when I heard that Sophia had been calling your workplace asking strange questions. Eleanor was surprised. Sophia called my workplace? I heard it from your colleague Jennifer, Michael continued. Sophia had been asking detailed questions about your work schedule and what kind of documents you handle. So you called the police? I wasn't certain then. But your mother's behavior today was so abnormal that I consulted with the police just in case. The officer interjected, thanks to Mr. Harrison's report, we were conducting surveillance tonight. That's how we could respond simultaneously with the ambulance. That's not all, Michael took a small bottle from his bag. I switched the wine bottles in the kitchen. Linda and Eleanor both turned around simultaneously. Switched? When your mother was preparing the special wine, she was acting unnaturally. So I replaced the contents with ordinary wine, Michael explained. The poisoned wine is preserved in this. The officer took the bottle. This will be important evidence. Eleanor was confused. Then Sophia? She has poisoning symptoms, but her life isn't in danger, a doctor entered the room. Test results show mild sleeping pill poisoning. She should recover by tomorrow. Linda looked relieved. Thank goodness. However, the officer's expression was stern. Mrs. Harrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Wait, Eleanor interrupted. Mom, why did you choose me? Why sacrifice me instead of Sophia? Linda was silent for a long time. Eventually, she answered in a faint voice. Because Sophia is weak. Weak? You're strong, aren't you? You've always done everything on your own since childhood. Tears appeared in Linda's eyes. Sophia is a child who can't survive without me. But I thought you'd be okay. Eleanor was aghast. Because I'm strong, it's okay to sacrifice me? That's not what I meant. That's not what you meant? Eleanor's voice trembled with anger. You were going to frame me for a crime and ruin my life? Linda couldn't answer. The officer handcuffed Linda. Will you exercise your right to remain silent? No, Linda replied resignedly. I'll tell you everything. All the details of Sophia's debts and the complete plan. Michael put his arm around Eleanor's shoulder. It's okay, now. The truth has come out. Eleanor leaned against her husband, feeling conflicted. She had thought she was loved by her family, but in reality, she had been seen as a convenient sacrificial pawn. That reality hurt her heart more deeply than any poison could have. The next morning, Sophia regained consciousness. However, police were scheduled to question her about conspiracy to commit embezzlement as well. The Thanksgiving family gathering had transformed overnight into the beginning of a legal battle. 1 year later, on Thanksgiving, Eleanor was in her in-laws' kitchen, surrounded by the warm aroma of pumpkin pie. Michael's family had welcomed her like their own daughter. Eleanor, that gravy is perfect, her mother-in-law Margaret said with a smile. Will you teach me the recipe? Of course, Eleanor returned a genuine smile. In this house, her cooking was appreciated without criticism and welcomed with pure joy. In the dining room, Jacob and Emily were playing happily with their cousins. For the children, this year had been one of major changes. Their grandmothers and aunts' arrests, the family's breakdown. However, surrounded by the warmth of Michael's family, they were gradually healing their emotional wounds. Mommy, is last year's grandma doing okay? Emily asked innocently. Eleanor thought for a moment before answering. Grandma is spending time thinking about what she did wrong. The trial had ended 6 months ago. Linda received a suspended sentence for conspiracy to commit embezzlement and attempted murder. Meanwhile, Sophia, due to actually planning embezzlement and her gambling addiction being a contributing factor, received a 3-year prison sentence. Currently, Sophia was in a state prison receiving treatment for gambling addiction. Once a month, letters about her treatment progress arrived through her lawyer, but Eleanor had never written back. Eleanor, congratulations on your promotion at work, her father-in-law Robert said. You became assistant department head, right? Thank you, Eleanor replied. After the incident, her company recognized her innocence and deepened their trust in her. Her supervisor praised her as someone who can handle difficult situations calmly and supported her promotion. Michael placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. Eleanor really worked hard. Even after that incident, she never lost her sense of responsibility to her work. When dinner time came, the entire family gathered around the table. As her father-in-law offered a prayer of thanksgiving, Eleanor quietly closed her eyes. We give thanks that our family can spend healthy, love-filled time together again this year. We're grateful for overcoming difficult times and deepening true family bonds. When the meal began, conversation flowed naturally. Here, no one dredged up past failures, and no one tried to make themselves look good by putting others down. They purely celebrated each other's successes and supported each other in times of trouble. This is what real family is, Eleanor realized. After dinner, Eleanor went out on the porch alone. Stars sparkled beautifully in the night sky. She took out an envelope from her pocket, a letter from Sophia that had arrived last week. Dear sister. Through the treatment program, I've come to understand how wrong I was. I deeply regret being consumed by gambling and trying to sacrifice you. I hope someday you might forgive me. Eleanor reread the letter and then quietly put it away in a drawer. She wasn't ready to forgive yet. Still, she could see that Sophia was trying to change. "Mommy, there you are," Jacob approached. "Everyone's going to play games." "I'll be right there," Eleanor patted her son's head. Before returning inside, Eleanor looked back. Far away in her hometown, Linda was probably alone, heating up a TV dinner. She must be shedding tears of regret, thinking about the family she'd lost. But Eleanor would never go back. She wanted to teach her children new values. Being family doesn't give you the right to hurt each other. True love means respecting and supporting one another. In the dining room filled with warm light, her new family was waiting for her. Eleanor returned to the family circle with a smile, carrying the past but with determination to walk toward a hopeful future.